Sigma is an insanely powerful hero in Overwatch 2 who can dominate games in the right hands.
What? A gravitic flux? That is absurd!
That is filthy.
But it isn't always that easy, is it? Well, don't worry, because with these 8 tips, you too will quickly begin to win more games and to climb in rank. I've even got a bonus tip at the end of the video which even pros use to secure more kills, resulting in countless more victories. So, let's get into it. Now, the first tip is simple yet very important, and it all has to do with Sigma's primary fire and how to optimize your damage output. First thing you need to consider is that his hyperspheres are projectiles, meaning that leading your shots is crucial to your success. I know this may seem obvious, but it really is important as you're going to want to aim for those direct hits. Another thing is that his shots can bounce off walls. This will come in handy quite often as it means you can shoot the enemy without them being able to retaliate as they had no line of sight. The third point is to melee between each 2-round volley. This actually doesn't really decrease your rate of fire at all, and up close it can be crucial in out-damaging your opponent. Combine these 3 things and you will be able to maximise your outgoing damage, and so get far more kills as well as ult charge. Next, let's talk about Sigma's shield and what you're able to do with it. Thanks to its mobility, his shield is very versatile and so can help you in many ways. One of his uses is to block enemy abilities. Heroes such as Hog, Ana, or even an enemy Sigma can destroy you with their crowd control like Hook or Sleep, resulting in almost certain death for you or more likely one of your teammates. Now, that obviously isn't a good thing, but you actually have exactly the tools necessary in order to prevent it. That's right, your shield is the perfect answer for this. Similar to when playing Ryan, you're going to want to make sure to block as many of the enemy's abilities as possible. However, it is a little more difficult than on Ryan since your shield does have a cooldown. This means that you need to be extra careful with when you put out your shield, especially in tank matchups versus Sigma or Hawk. I'm not saying never to use your shield except for this purpose, but it can be a good thing to keep in mind, especially when you know the enemy is about to have another blockable ability online, so you can nullify its impact. Okay, there's actually another really important thing you should be doing with your shield, but first let's talk about that rock of yours. Now, this is arguably one of the best parts of Sigma's entire kit, so using it effectively is key. With this, what you need to know is when to use it, and honestly it's difficult to give a straightforward answer. This is because it really depends on the enemy team and what heroes they're running. However, one general rule of thumb I can give is to not always just use it immediately off cooldown. When you use accretion, you have to have a purpose. The 2 main uses I'd say are to secure kills or to ward off an enemy rush or dive. First one is quite simple. You can throw your rock, usually a squishy, to stun them and allow you to follow up with 2 shots in a melee, if close enough, in order to kill them. The other use though is probably even more important. Winston jumps you, rock. Ram runs at you, rock. Genji blades, rock, if you can actually hit him. Here's the part where your usage of the ability depends on what the enemy is playing. For example, if you're playing high and the other team is running dive, you may want to save rock almost exclusively to prevent such dives. Meanwhile, if you're versing a Sigma or Hog, you can use rock to cancel their defensive cooldowns. Again, it's difficult to give an exact tip for this, but just try to evaluate the enemy team comp and decide how to best use accretion accordingly. But what if the enemy tank isn't threatening to attack you, but instead there's a Widow murdering the rest of your team? Well, that's where your shield comes back into play. The 4th tip of this video is to use your shield to deny enemy snipers. Thanks to your shield's high mobility, you can just put it in their face and there you go. This is especially effective against Widow since she's so bad at breaking your shield. One thing you do need to be aware of though is that enemies simply moving. A lot of the time your shield won't be big enough to deny the entire high ground, or the Widow may decide to move to a different area. Well then, just take down your shield and then move it to their new location. Of course, this strategy doesn't completely deny the enemy snipers, and you do need to be careful on the front line as you won't always have your shield at the ready, but overall this is quite effective indeed. It's exactly why he's so popular among pros, specifically on sniper heavy maps such as Junkertown or even more so Circuit Royale. And he becomes even more effective on a map like Circuit Royale if you're able to properly utilise the power of the high ground. That's right, it's back to the basics of positioning for this one. Of all the tanks of the game, Sigma's probably the one most reliant on positioning. This is due to his focus on keeping the enemy at range, but his lack of escape based abilities. As a result, usage of a high ground in order to keep enemies at a distance becomes very important. This is especially the case against a rush comp with tanks such as Rhino Ram, as you are almost completely useless in that matchup if they're able to get within punching distance. Sadly, good positioning isn't something you can learn overnight. I can start you off with some basic tips like controlling the high ground and staying away from places where you could get cut off from the rest of your team, but due to the volatility of the game, where is and isn't a good position changes constantly, so it's difficult to say that one spot is better than another in all situations. Sure, it might be in most, but that's something you need to decide on a case by case basis, and that kind of situal awareness is simply something that comes with time. However, if you really want to, you can search up a general positioning guide after watching this video, but do be careful with that as some points may apply better or worse to Sigma specifically. Some advice I can give to help you immediately though has to do with your kinetic grasp. Visibility is a great defensive tool, allowing you to absorb all the projectiles thrown your way and convert them into extra health. Yet, the issue is that I see some people using it aggressively to rush the enemy team. First of all, you shouldn't be running straight at their team most of the time. Even when attacking, you'll want to use cover to slowly advance on the enemy and maybe catch someone out or allow your teammates to get picks. You should then have your grasp ever ready to instead use it as an escape. As I said earlier, Sigma has no mobility and so is vulnerable when caught out of position or at low health. However, your grasp helps to prevent this. You can use it to not only prevent incoming damage whilst retreating to your team, allowing them to heal you, but it also gives you extra health at the end to make sure you stay alive. As with all things, there is a level of situational awareness that needs to be applied, but overall, you will get much more value from using it to keep yourself alive. We still have a few big tips left to cover, but first I'd appreciate if you could throw a rock at that like button. Wait, how would that even work? Anyways, it will be very valuable to me and help me make more of these videos for you to enjoy. On to Sigma's ultimate now, and the biggest cause as to why you may not be finding it as powerful as you should. Now, Gravitic Flux is very strong, yet it does get stopped by basically every form of crowd control in the game. Versus Javelin, Hog's Hook, and honestly, just to name a few. This is why it's so very important to track the enemy's ability cooldowns. What I mean by this is to be more aware of when these abilities are used, so you can then use your ult during the window in which the enemy can't do anything about it. I'm not saying you have to track every single one of the enemy's abilities, but you will want to consider the ones which can stop you. Try to look at their comp and think of what and who could prevent your ult from getting value. This also includes defensive and escape based cooldowns, such as Mora's Fade or Bap's Immortality Field. Be aware of these two so that no one survives your wrath. I know it may seem like a lot, but luckily most teams will only have a few of these views to track at a time, and if it really is too much, you can just avoid CC by putting out your shield pre-ult, or dipping behind cover immediately afterwards. However, knowing when your ult will be able to get maximum value is crucial to your success, and it can be game defining. I hope these tips help, but the last one is a little different. Know when to switch. Sigma is possibly the most map dependent hero in the entire game thanks to his reliance on high ground and specific usefulness in countering snipers. What this means though is that playing Sigma isn't always the best pick. Of course, if you're good enough you can still carry, but sometimes it's better to simply accept the switch. This is especially the case on heavily rush favored maps, as they have very limited high ground for you to play from, and make it very difficult to escape from an attacking Rhino or ramp. In these situations it will benefit you to be able to recognise this and adapt, because that's what this game is really all about. Don't worry though, I won't leave the video there. In fact, I actually have a bonus tip for those of you who watch this far. It may be a little niche and not always applicable, but if you're able to implement it at the right time, it will really help with securing kills, especially on enemy tanks. What I'm talking about is to actually shield behind the enemy. Now, this may seem confusing at first, but there's actually a good reason. When in a bad spot, an injured tank will rely on the heals from his supports, likely stood further back. Yet, many projectiles are blocked by your shield. So, if you put your shield behind the enemy, they will be isolated from their heals and so likely die. This makes doing so especially useful against someone like Ana, who solely relies on projectile based healing. As I said, it isn't always applicable since someone like Brig isn't affected by it at all, but it can still be good to know. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment any additional advice you have down below, and if you want to know more about why Sigma and others can be so difficult to balance in a game like Overwatch, check out this video on why it may be a never ending issue. I'll see you next time.